Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Now that everybody's well fed, you'll probably fall right asleep as I drone on. It's okay. I've got my caffeine, so I'll stay awake at least. We're going to get started here in just a second. We'll be starting in chapter 5, verse 21. This is where we left off last time. By way of non-introduction, introduction, once again, for purposes of the recording. And Mr. Bill, you'll be excited. There's a possibility these recordings may be spread out even farther in the near future. So,
is this good news?
Your celebrity will continue to expand. For purposes of the recording. On the first two, really, Bible studies on Mark, I did all the introduction, so I won't put you to sleep by going through all that again. But just very quickly to catch us up to where we were, we just read the story about the deviled ham.
Oh, I have
Give me a second. Wherever Jesus has been up in Galilee, on my bad map here, which is up here in the north around the Sea of Galilee, which is where Nazareth is, which is where Capernaum is. He's been preaching, and though we haven't gotten a lot of the contents of his preaching, he has been preaching. We're told he's been preaching. And mainly what we've seen in the Gospel of Mark so far is healing people and casting out demons. A lot of healing, a lot of casting out demons. And he took a break, went across the Sea of Galilee to the other side, to the region of the Gadarenes, which is over here. And we had the whole incident where he encountered the demon-possessed man. He drove the demons out of the man into the pigs. Pigs ran off the cliff and died. And all the people told him to beat it. They didn't want anything to do with it. So as we pick up here today in verse 21, Jesus is going to be getting out of a boat. And that's because they sailed back. They're back now in Galilee, where he's been ministering so far and where his reputation has been expanding. I'll get you just a second. You see Galilee? It's really a lake. I understand. Right, I mean, it's not like the Mediterranean Sea. It's about the size like here, but rounder. About that size. That gives you an idea.
pretty fair distance. It's not something that you
wouldn't swim. Yeah, you wouldn't swim.
This is from Bob, and it's a little bit confusing. It's a two-pronged question, and it deals with the comment that Jesus made. Jesus being man and being God and knowing all of the hearts of everybody, okay? They were afraid. And I have to preface this.
Oh, so this is back on the boat during the storm?
On the boat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give us our context. Okay.
I'm sorry. We're on that, okay?
Okay.
And yet we look at it and we look true at the other three Gospels, and yes, they are intentional. But we hear Jesus not wanting anybody to know who he is. Going back and talking to the people, and in particular his apostles. Okay? I don't know how to put this and not seem like I'm a heretic.
Just embrace your heresy. Just go for it.
Well,
Sin boldly.
What I'm trying to say is, if you're God, okay?
If you're God. Okay.
Okay, if you're God, and you say, okay, look, I heal people, I do this, but I talk in parables, and you see everything I've done, but don't tell anybody, okay? Man being man, okay, and the superstition at that time, saying, yes, he heals people, but can he calm the sea, okay? Because there are people, were there not people who could heal, who could cast out demons?
Right. The issue isn't whether they knew he could calm the sea or not. The issue is this: do they really believe he's the Messiah?
But did he
Just a
ask
second.
who I am?
Just a second.
I'm sorry.
Because if they really believe he's the Messiah, right? They really believe he's the Messiah. Okay, you can look at all the prophecies in the Old Testament about the Messiah. Dying on a 2-day boat trip is not in there. Right? In the middle of his ministry. Okay? Right? That's not in there. Okay? So, the idea there is that, right, we've seen these other people other than the disciples. See, this is coming from, St. Mark is writing St. Peter's own testimony. So St. Peter's talking about himself, right, as much as anyone, right, that he didn't get it until after the resurrection, right. We've seen these other people from outside, the leper, right, demons, right? and people who want to be healed, the friends of the paralytic. They all believe Jesus is the Messiah. And they're willing to go out on a limb, right? The leper is willing to walk up to a group of people. He could have been killed for that, right? Executed for that. The paralytic's friends are, sawing through a roof and lowering him in. Right? They're willing to go out on a limb based on their belief that this guy is the Messiah. Okay? So the problem is the disciples, the ones who are the closest to Jesus, the ones who he's spoken to the most, the ones who he's explained all this to, right? These people should be the ones who are the most certain, right? Right? They should be the most faithful, the most loyal, because they're the inner circle, and he's explained all this to them, right? And yet, over and over and over again, this being another exhibit, they doubt, right? They doubt. Because they don't come to Jesus and say, hey, Jesus, we're in a lot of trouble. What are we going to do? Right? Jesus says, they come and they accuse him. Right? Are you reading, Mark, what they say? They say, don't you care that we're all about to die?
They're refrain.
Right? They're accusing him. Right? Which shows, right, they must, at that moment at least, have had some pretty big doubts as to whether this guy was the Messiah. Right? They're either thinking we're all going to die. Right? This is parallel to, and it's deliberate. On Peter and Mark's part, it's parallel to when they went out into the wilderness, out of Egypt. Right? Remember, Moses comes and does all these miracles. Right? They see the 10 plagues. They see the Passover.
They build the golden.
They got the fire lead them at night, and the cloud lead them during the day. They see all this miraculous stuff. Right? They're out in the desert for about, what, a week? And they're like, Moses brought us all out here to die. Right? We should kill him and go back to Egypt. Right? Why? Well, because they don't really believe. Right? They don't really believe in Moses. They don't really believe in God. Right? Despite of all the stuff they've seen. That's the kind of parallel that's working here. The disciples, in spite of all the stuff they've seen, right, which you'd think would convince you, right, having seen all this stuff, despite all the stuff they've seen, right, are just like these, he brought us out here on the ocean to die. Right? We're all going to die.
Don't we all respond to God?
And they come and accuse him. Well, yeah, at times, yeah. But so that's why it says that he was harsh, because he's like, really? You've seen all this stuff and you're doubting me? Like the Pharisees and stuff, okay, right? He's threatening their way of life. He's threatening their, religious system which they derive power. But the disciples, he's explained everything to them, not in parables.
But he sent them out 2 by 2. They have performed miracles.
Yeah, they perform miracles themselves.
And why can they, with lack of faith, did not say, calm the sea?
Well, it doesn't say they even tried. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's speculation because we don't want to know.
Yeah. But the point is they aren't trusting in Jesus.
All right.
That maybe they didn't think he was going to calm the storm, but get him through it somehow without dying, right? I mean, that's, if he could heal these people and cleanse lepers, surely he could keep you from drowning, right? Some way.
They panicked.
Yeah, they panicked. That was it. And yeah, James, you're right. I mean, we all do that. We all have a lot of faith when everything's going fine and everything is nice, and then something really bad hits us. We get a cancer diagnosis, or we get, really bad financial news, or we get really, and then all of a sudden it's like, you know, we're angry at God, and don't you care about me? Don't you? Right. Then all of a sudden the universe is random and chaotic, and we're all going to die, and everything's terrible, right? We can be a little harsh with them, right? Because we do the same thing. But yeah, that's the issue there. The issue there is that they of all people, right? They should have been the most faithful. They should have been the most confident in Jesus and who he was. And they're not. Right? These other people who are outsiders and sort of random, right? Lepers and sick people are showing more faith than his inner circle of disciples are showing.
Can I ask one more?
Is this the other prong? You said there are two prongs.
Well, if this is the situation then with all that we have here, we ourselves in this time and in this place, okay, being human, we always fall short. Is this where it comes, many are called and only few will be chosen because of the faith to the end?
Well, he who perseveres to the end will be saved. Yeah. And remember in the parable of the sower, right, that he explained earlier in Mark, there's that seed that falls and it shoots up real fast, right? But it doesn't have any roots. And so then when the trouble comes, right, it gets wiped out. So that's sort of the seed that the disciples are showing themselves to be, at least at this point in the story, right? They shot up real fast. Right? They're real quick to say, oh yeah, we're going to follow you, Jesus. Yeah, this is great. We're healing people. We're doing this stuff, right? Then stuff gets hard and they sort of all fall apart. They're going to do better later. But right now, this is where they're at. So, any other questions before we get started? Okay. So Mark 5, verse 21. Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. Now remember, this was the problem he kept having, is that whenever anybody heard he was around in Galilee, these huge mobs of people would show up. Especially when he was by the ocean, they're all crowding around him trying to get to him. You know, they're pushing him back into the ocean. So as soon as he gets back from the land of the Gadarenes to the other side, right, Galilee, they hear, oh, he's back, and everybody comes mobbing out to the seacoast to see him. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, my little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be healed and she will live. So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Okay? So a couple of things about this person. First of all, he has a Latin name. Right? Jairus is a Latin name, not a Hebrew name, but he was Jewish. Right? So this shows you again, as we talked about before, Galilee up here, how it's sort of a mixed culture. A lot of the people there are ethnically Jewish, but it's sort of a Greco-Roman cultural area. It also says he was a ruler of the synagogue. Well, what does that mean? Well,
But if he's a ruler of the synagogue, would he be the chief priest?
No, priests are only in the temple,
And the temple.
down in Jerusalem.
He's like a deacon at the church.
No, Levites are like the deacons. What happens is, we talked before about how synagogues, right? You can look all over the Old Testament, you're not going to see anything about a synagogue right, anywhere. Synagogues sort of came out of the practicality of the fact that after the Babylonian exile, right, after the persecution by the Greeks, after the Roman conquest, that Jewish people essentially weren't all confined to Judea anymore. Right? They're scattered all over the world, literally. There's a big community of, in the first century, there was a big community of Jews in Spain. If that gives you an idea of how far spread out they are. In Spain, in Rome, North Africa, we talked about Cyrene, where Mark was from. Right? So they're spread out all over the world. Well, the Old Testament's very clear, right, in the law. You're only allowed to worship God in one place, right, in terms of making sacrifices. That's the temple in Jerusalem. Okay. That's all well and good when everybody lives within about 100 miles, right, of the temple in Jerusalem. But what happens when you live on the other side of the world from the temple in Jerusalem, and we don't have cars or planes, or right? So realistically, a Jew in Spain, maybe once in his life, right? Some of the more wealthy ones might be able to take a trip to Jerusalem for one of the feasts, but a lot of them would never make it, right? So how are they supposed to function as Judeans, as Jewish people, right? Some of them are just going to give up their religion and just become Romans, right? Start worshiping the Roman gods, right? Living Roman lives. But the ones who want to hold on to worshiping their God, right, being part of Israel, that identity, what they do is they form synagogues. Synagogue is from the Greek word that just means a place where you gather together. So it's just a gathering place. So they set up these synagogues as places for them to get together, right, and pray and read the scriptures. Right? They can't offer sacrifices there because you can only do that in Jerusalem, right? And so, in order to do such a thing at this point in history, right, it's not like they passed a hat and took up a collection, because there's no middle class at this time in history. You've got a lot of slaves and a lot of poor people, and then you've got wealthy people. So what you had was a few wealthy people buying the building, right, and paying for the upkeep of the building, right? And those people were referred to as the rulers of the synagogue. Okay? And because they were the ones who were sort of paying for the synagogue and operating it, they became leaders in the Jewish community in whatever city it was in. Right? So when there were disputes between Jewish people, right, as we talked about before, the Romans didn't care, right? And unless they were Roman citizens, they couldn't go to court even if they wanted to. Right? And 99% of the Jews were not Roman citizens. So who was going to resolve disputes? Who was going to resolve these issues? Well, that fell to the rulers of the synagogue. Right? They sort of took on the role. Remember, we read the Old Testament, they talk about the elders of the people. Right? They talk about the elders of a particular city, the older men of the city. The rulers of the synagogue sort of took on that role in these Jewish communities that were scattered all over the Greco-Roman world. So Jesus is here in the area around Bethsaida. So Jairus, right, part of why we can tell he's well-to-do is he has a Roman name, right, which means he's doing business with the Romans, right? So he's well-to-do. He's one of the people who is endowing the local synagogue. So he's not just a Jewish person living in Capernaum. He's one of the leaders, right? He's one of the leaders. And so part of what's going on here in Mark is that we're seeing an attitude from this Jewish leader that's very different than the attitude we've seen from the Pharisees, right, the scribes, the leaders from down here in Judea and Jerusalem. Remember, Mark keeps saying, it's very specific, Pharisees came up from Jerusalem, right? Scribes came up from Jerusalem, right? They're part of this sort of temple power base down here in Judea. Up here in Galilee, they're somewhat independent, and so each community sort of has its own leaders. And Jairus is one of those. Now Jairus, again, we see this contrast with Jairus' faith, right? Jairus just shows up, his daughter's about to die, right? She's sick and about to die. And he shows up and states rather matter-of-factly, Jesus, if you come to my house and you put my hands on her, she will live and she will not die. That's a fair amount of faith, and especially considering he was a wealthy person, right? He could actually go and hire a doctor if he wanted to, right? But in these moments where his daughter's dying, he doesn't run and try and hire a doctor, right? He doesn't go and offer sacrifices at a pagan temple, right, for her health, right? He doesn't do anything. He goes to Jesus because he believes that if Jesus comes and puts his hand on her, that's it, right? She'll live. She'll be fine. Okay, so that's a pretty extreme amount of faith. He's got, in his mind, this little window of time, and he's betting all his chips, in terms of his daughter's life, on Jesus. So Jesus is following Jairus back to his house, but this huge crowd is sort of all following them. Verse 25, now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and had suffered many things from many physicians. I like the way that's phrased. She had suffered many things from many physicians. Remember, there was not such a thing as medical science at this point in history, right? There was medicine, okay, but it wasn't scientific, right? It was a lot of hearsay. Yeah, there's a lot of books getting passed around, right? So there are all kinds of weird theories, right? Like Aristotle's works on anatomy were the standard sort of Greco-Roman textbooks. And for example, Aristotle believed that the reason people breathe is that your insides are basically on fire all the time. And so to cool it down and keep you from overheating, you've got to intake air. Right? And that's why he thought air comes in cold and goes out hot. Right? That was like his theory, right? And so, and then if you had heartburn or something, that's because the fire was getting too out of control. Right? So they try and cool you down. So, and they believed at that time, if you've ever heard of humors, they believe that there are these various fluids pumped through your body, bile, not just blood, but blood, bile, urine, right? All these, and that a lot of sicknesses were caused by those getting out of balance. So they thought certain things, like if you had a fever, that was because you had too much blood in you, right? Because blood's warm. So they would bleed you, right? They'd cut you and let some of the blood out, thinking that would help. That's actually how a couple millennia later, that's how George Washington died. The doctors killed him, right? By drawing too much blood trying to cure his fever from pneumonia.
I thought maybe they would feed him some bile to rebalance.
Well, they'll do that too. They would have people at bile, they've had people drinking animal urine, they had all kinds of crazy stuff. And you would have these books, we have these books that were compiled that are sort of like old wives' tales and folk remedies, right? Where, it's like, well, if someone has this, well, you make a poultice, right? You go and get this root and some donkey urine and, some of this and some of that. You wrap it up in a bag, you put it on the wound for 3 days, right? If you look at it, it turns this color, then you do this. If it turns that color, you do this other thing, right? So, in terms of outcomes, at this point in history and for several more centuries, poor people who couldn't afford doctors were actually better off. Health-wise. You actually, like if you got pneumonia, just rolling the dice on no treatment was better than what they would do to you to try and cure your pneumonia in terms of your ongoing health. So that's what Mark's referring to when it says she'd suffered many things from many physicians. Right? She's got this flow of blood, which is referring to menstrual blood. Okay, so she's got some sort of gynecological issue where she's bleeding constantly, right? For 12 years. Right? 12 years. And she's been going to all these doctors who have been trying all these crazy cockamamie things, right, to cure it. And not only are they not curing it, she's had to suffer through all the nonsense they're doing, which isn't helping.
You see some of these medicines that they have on TV and all side effects.
Yeah.
Side effects from ear to honey.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we're a little better now, but there's still issues.
There's like a 21 side effect issue.
Yeah.
21 issue.
Yeah. So this is what this woman's been going through. Okay, she's had this issue. And consider of all the illness to have, right? Consider that according to the Torah, remember the Old Testament law, when you're menstruating, a woman is unclean, right? This means she's been unclean for 12 years. Right? For 12 years she hasn't been able to set foot in the synagogue. She hasn't been able to go over to other people's houses. She hasn't been allowed to touch people. Right? Other people. Okay? We don't know whether she was married or not, but she wouldn't have been allowed to be with her husband. She would have been allowed to touch her children. Right? Because she's been unclean this whole time for 12 years. So it's compounded. She's got the ailment, she's got what the doctors are doing to her, she's got the way the surrounding culture is treating her, right, for those 12 years. And then after the suffered many things from many physicians, she had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. Right? Because the physicians, in addition to torturing her, were taking her money. Right? For torturing her. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." Here again, right? As opposed to the disciples, we're all going to die. Right? Look at it. She's like, he doesn't even need to do anything. He doesn't even need to know I'm there. Right? I'll just kind of sneak up behind, because he wouldn't let me touch him otherwise, because I'm unclean. And I'll just sneak up behind him and just kind of touch him. If I could just touch his robe, right, it will cure what this last 12 years of doctors haven't been able to cure. Right? Again, this is a huge amount of faith. Right? This is a huge amount of faith. If she walked up and grabbed him and got caught, again, she could be stoned to death. She's unclean. She's not allowed to go around grabbing people. Right? Especially not men in public. Right? So she touches him, and in verse 29, immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" So it happens, right? She asks for his faith, she touches his robe, boom. 12 years of sickness gone, right? But then you have to sort of imagine, right? Happy, right? She's happy, she knows she's well. And then he says, "Who touched me?" Yeah. Right? Verse 31, but his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" They're like, "Jesus, we're in the middle of a mob." All kinds of people are bumping into you and brushing up against you and touching you. We're like, "What do you mean, who touched you?" Right? What are you talking about? And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Right? That's why she's scared. Right? Because she was unclean and she was untouched. She could have been, right? This mob, if this mob turned into an angry mob, she could have been stoned to death right there. Right? But she comes to Jesus and says, "Here's what happened." Right? I believe that if I just said, and I am healed. I am healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." So Jesus not only isn't mad, right? He points her out. Why does he point her out? Not to scare the doo-doo out of her, right? Not to upset her, but to make it. He wants what? He wants the people around, the disciples and the other people, to see her faith, right? To see the faith that she had. He wants them to know what happened. That's why he stops and says something. And this is another example like the leper, right? How does it traditionally work in the law of the Old Testament? If you're clean and you touch something unclean, you become unclean, right? That's why she wasn't allowed to touch it. But with Jesus touches something unclean or someone unclean, and they become clean. Right? They're transformed and they're healed by Jesus rather than the other way around. Right? Rather than the other way around.
Before you go on,
Yeah.
does he just tell her to be healed as a confirmation that
Yeah.
he knows she's healed and that the crowd
Yeah.
knows she's healed?
Yeah, because she felt like she was.
He knows.
Right. But, yeah.
She felt it.
Yeah. But he's confirming to everyone hearing, that is actually what happened.
Does the church teach that she went on to do other things and tell us what her name was and like the woman at the well?
And her case, no. There is a Sunday every year between Pentecost and Pentecost when we remember her, but she isn't named. So she is remembered, but we don't have a record of her name. But this story is, you'll notice some people, and this is a tradition going way back in the old country, sometimes during the great entrance when we're carrying the Eucharist around, people will come and touch like the vestments of the priest. Right? That comes from this. That's where that tradition comes from. Right? That's where that.
So if you're walking around upstairs and somebody touches you, you know what it means.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why we don't get mad.
It's okay.
Now don't grab on us. Dog us down. But they'll just touch like the, with their
Come here and heal.
Yeah. The edge of your vestment or something as you walk past.
To show off his tassels.
Yeah. I don't have tassels on mine. Mine aren't that fancy. Okay, so verse 35. While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" So Jesus gets waylaid with this event. Right? People come from Jairus' house and say, "Jairus, sorry, we got bad news. Your daughter died." So don't bother Jesus. It's too late. It's too late. She's
Quite
dead.
a contrast.
Yeah, between Jairus and them. Yeah.
I would believe the people who came from his house.
Oh yeah.
Admittedly, they didn't witness the healing
Yeah.
before, but still.
Well, and there's also a big difference between healing someone sick and raising the dead. Right? I mean, that's a big gap. Right? Okay, so she's dead. No, don't bother him anymore. As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." So he doesn't let Jairus respond. Right? He doesn't give Jairus a chance to turn to him and say, "Okay, Jesus, I guess, thanks anyway." Right? Doesn't give him a chance. He says, Right? Don't be afraid. Just believe. Right? And the tense of the verb is, he's saying, continue believing. Right? You came to me because you had faith and you believed. Don't stop now. Don't stop now. And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. So Peter and James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Right? Not even the whole 12. Right? Just those three that are sort of the inner circle of the inner circle. It says, you three can come into the house with me. And he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. Okay, so she's died, right? The family members are all mourning already, right? They're weeping and wailing. When he came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? This child is not dead, but sleeping." Jesus comes in and says, "Why are you all panicking?" Right? No, she's just asleep. And they ridiculed him. Right? Because they're like, dude, right? Not breathing, heart's not beating. This is a long nap, right? If she's sleeping. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him, and entered where the child was lying. Okay? So they all say, "What are you, nuts?" She's sleeping, right? So he throws them all out. He takes Jairus, his wife, right, and those three disciples. And that's it. They go in to see the girl. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cumi," which is translated, I don't know why they did this, which is translated, "Little girl, arise." I don't know why they threw that "I say to you" in there. It's pretty obvious that those two words do not mean, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." It means, "Little girl, arise." Okay, in Aramaic. Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. Notice, think that's a coincidence? She was born around the same time that the woman got sick. And they were overcome with great amazement. So he takes her hand, he says, little girl, arise, little girl, get up. Right? And lifts her up, and she gets up and walks around. So, and they were amazed is kind of an understatement for her parents and for the disciples. Right? So she's alive. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it. Right? No one should know it.
We all know it.
Well, as we've seen, Jesus keeps telling people, don't tell anybody, and then immediately they go and tell everybody.
Why did he bother?
Imagine if he hadn't said that. Right. But he commanded strictly no one should know it, and said that something should be given to her to eat. So a couple things. Why would he say give her something to eat? Proves she's really alive. Yeah. This isn't a ghost. Right? This isn't a spirit, right? This isn't a hallucination. Right? That the parents are so overcome with grief, that they're hallucinating that their daughter is still alive. Right? If she's eating food, it's not a hallucination. Right? So he does this to prove she's actually alive. Right? Now, a lot of people have put a whole lot of freight into this whole she's not dead, she's just sleeping thing. Right? And she's just sleeping. So you'll get people to say, oh, that must mean that when you die, you just go to sleep. Right? You go to sleep, and then judgment day comes, you wake up. Right? It's called soul sleep. There have been several groups in history that have taught it. Probably the most common one around here that you would have heard of is the Seventh-day Adventists. I believe this. Okay. But let's take it in context. Okay. What did Jesus do at the end? He says, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody what? That I just raised this girl from the dead. Right? Meaning, all those people who saw her dead, right, who he just threw out of the house, what are they supposed to tell them? She wasn't dead, she was asleep. Right? Right? That's why Jesus says that to those people before he throws them out. Right? Because we've got this secret we're keeping. Right? We've got this secret we're still keeping that Jesus is the Messiah. Why would he be so dead set on keeping this a secret? That he would go to all this trouble? Wasn't his time. Let's go to the Gospel of John. Briefly. We'll visit it briefly. And even though we haven't read it yet, our Holy Week is based on the Gospel of John. The way he works. Right? What comes right before Palm Sunday? Like the day before? Lazarus Saturday, right? Where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And what happened after Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead? The Pharisees, the scribes, right? The Jewish leaders all got together to conspire not only how to kill Jesus, but how to kill Lazarus. John says, right? Why do they want to kill Lazarus? What did Lazarus do? Lazarus is the evidence. Right? You got Lazarus who is dead walking around alive. Well, that's a pretty good argument for Jesus being the Messiah, right? You say, Lazarus, remember his funeral? Yeah, here he is. Right? 4 days ago, remember we buried him? Right? Well, if they kill him, dispose of the evidence, right? So immediately, right, Jesus raising someone from the dead brought about not only Palm Sunday and the triumphal entry where everybody was like, oh my gosh, he is the Messiah, right? He raised somebody from the dead, but also we need to kill him now. right, from the other side. Okay? So we're in chapter 5, right? The Gospel of Mark. Right? Is it time to have this showdown? Is now the time where we're going to have this? No, we're not there yet. We're not even close to there yet. Right? Jesus still has a whole lot of people, right, to preach to, right, and a whole lot to do before we get to that. It's coming, but before we get there. And so it has to be kept. It has to be kept a secret, right, for now. Then once Jesus is risen from the dead, we can go out and proclaim this openly to everybody.
Would, after he raised the girl from the dead, would he also be afraid they'd come down and try to kill her too for what he had done?
That's what I'm suggesting.
In other words,
So that's what happened with Lazarus.
Yeah,
So if that happened with Lazarus, it's reasonable to believe
they'd come and kill her.
that would have happened here too. Or something similar would have happened here too.
So that he just tells them all, keep your mouths shut.
In a nice way.
For now, yeah.
Now, I didn't know that. Thank you.
For now, right? Jesus is sort of forced to do good secretly, right? And despite trying to get it, he keeps getting out, right? As we saw what happened when word about it got to Jerusalem, right? What happened? Were they happy? Right? Were they like, oh good, the Messiah showed up in Galilee, let's all go see him? Right? No, they sent some Pharisees and scribes and they follow him around, see what he's doing. Keep an eye on him. Right? It's the exact opposite response. So that's why, right, this is all going to come to a head. We're going to see here in just about 10 chapters. But we're a third of the way through the gospel already. Mark is short, right? But to even have the period of time, right, that Jesus is going to have. And Mark, we talk generally about Jesus having ministering for 3 years. That's also based on the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John presents it as happening over the course of 3 years. Matthew, Mark, and Luke present it as if it was just 1 year. Okay? They don't come out and say it was just 1 year. Right? But in their presentation, it looks like a very short time. So because it's taking us weeks and weeks and weeks for me to ramble on and on and on about all this stuff, and make it seem like this is going on for a long time, right? But Jesus' ministry is actually pretty short. It's a pretty short period of time from him publicly coming out and starting preaching to them killing him. And so what Mark is emphasizing is the only reason it was even as long as it was that Jesus did everything he could to try to keep it on the down low, right? Keep it secret. Right? Not let people know. Who didn't need to know. The people who he knew weren't going to accept it anyway. Okay. So speaking of people not accepting it. Chapter 6, verse 1. Then he went out from there and came to his own country, and his disciples followed him. And when the Sabbath had come, he began to teach in the synagogue. Okay, so by his own country, we're talking about Nazareth. Right? Nazareth is here in Galilee. So he leaves Bethsaida, the big city, goes to his hometown. Saturday rolls around, he goes to the synagogue for the Sabbath, and he starts teaching. Because at that time, we don't have, well, even today, actually, in synagogues in the U.S., if you go and talk to some Jewish people sometimes, it's interesting. We tend to think that all other religions are work the way ours does. Right? And we think, oh, well, the Jews must have like seminaries, and you go there and study to be a rabbi, and then, you get assigned to a synagogue. So it doesn't really work that way. It's very different. They still have basically rulers of the synagogue. They're sort of elders in any given synagogue. And they sort of go and find and pick a rabbi. Right? So at this time in history, it's even looser and less organized, right, in the first century. So, the people who would get up and speak could be anybody, who in the community who was reasonably educated about the scriptures. They would ask somebody to read who could read because there wasn't a huge amount of literacy. In Galilee, a lot of the synagogues, the only copies of the scriptures they had were the Septuagint, were the Greek version of the Old Testament. So you had to find somebody who could read Greek. Right? It wasn't even in Aramaic. You had to find somebody who was literate in Greek to read it. And then you'd have someone, often the same person who read it, because by being able to read Greek, that showed they were somewhat educated. Right? But some other person who was somewhat educated about the scriptures could be one of the scribes, could be the Pharisee, could be, in this case, Jesus, right? Would get up and teach. Okay? But, see, you've probably never been to one. But it was sort of like a Quaker meeting, but I know most of you have probably never been to a Quaker meeting. That's where there wasn't sort of a rabbi, right, of an individual synagogue, right, who was in charge of it, sort of like the pastor of a Christian church, right? That didn't exist at that time. Okay, so Jesus is able to just get up and start talking about scriptures. And many hearing him were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? And what wisdom is this which is given to him, that such mighty works are performed by his hands?" Right? Why are they wondering where he's getting this stuff? Because he's one of them. Because Jesus grew up there in Nazareth. Guess what? There's not a school there. Right? Right? There's not a school there. Jesus grew up poor. Right? They're going, where is he? He's there preaching about the scriptures like somebody who studied all his life, like one of these scribes, spent, like we said, 17 years, the scriptures Jesus gave him teaching. And then they're saying, and then the miracle, and he does these things too. Right? He's performing these miracles and healing people. He's like, where is this coming from? Right? They say in verse 3, "Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" Right? Now, carpenter, I know the Orthodox Study Bible went with the traditional thing and said carpenter. Here. The word in Greek is actually technon. It's actually the same root from which we get technology. But a technon was essentially a worker, right? Or a handyman. Right? It's more like our concept of a handyman. Okay? So somebody who was a technon, like Jesus' father, and presumably Jesus, growing up helping him, right? Wasn't just, we think carpenter, we think like he was sitting there making like furniture. You'll see these pictures often, sort of, little boy Jesus and Joseph, and they're like sanding down an end table or something, right? That they just built, right? That's way out of the time period, right? Somebody who is a technon, you'd be working with wood sometimes, right? You'd also be working with stone sometimes, repairing walls, repairing houses, repairing roofs, right? Going and, working with the well, rebuilding, things that were damaged. Okay, so essentially, this is kind of a day labor, what we call now a day laborer, right? You'd be doing different, or a handyman, doing different things every day, but just sort of helping around the village, right? Repairing things and helping things, making things go, right? There's a problem with the bread ovens, that the women are using to bake the bread, down there, whatever the problem is, right? So-and-so's roof collapsed last night. Got to go rebuild put the new thatch, right? So that's what they're saying, right? They're saying, who is this guy preaching? Where is he coming up with? He's like a day laborer, right? He was redoing my grout last Saturday. Now he's coming in here, right? And telling us all that. What? Right? And we know his brothers, right? His brothers are still hanging around this town. Right? His sisters. And he's going to get up here and he's going to preach at us. Right? And so the end result is, so they were offended at him. They were offended at him. Right?
Did nobody that lived there know that Mary was special?
No.
That wouldn't have given them a clue that.
No, and there are clues
Such as the fact that they refer to him as the son of Mary instead of the son of Joseph.
Exactly. There are little hints in the text like that, right? Isn't this the son of Mary? They didn't refer to people as the son of their mother, right? They're implying something there. Joseph isn't really the dad, right? And that's not because they believe in the virgin birth. Right? They very much don't believe in the virgin birth, right? They're implying, isn't he illegitimate kind of thing? Right? Remember Joseph was like an old man and she was like a teenager? Yeah, sure he's the dad. Right? So that's part of it too. Right? That's part of it too. That's part of what St. Joseph, St. Joseph the betrothed doesn't get enough credit. It's part of what he had to accept when the angel came to him in the vision. Right? Because, that was his response, remember? When he heard that Mary was pregnant. Right? He was like, oh, somebody got her pregnant. Right? But he was a stand-up guy, so he said, well, I'll take care of this quietly. Right? I'm not going to publicly shame her or anything, because he was an easy guy. But his first response was not like, oh, well, this must be the Son of God. Right? It was not. He was like, oh, wait, she was messing around. Okay, well, I'll be nice about it. Right? But part of what he had to accept when the angel came to him and said, no, this is the Messiah, this is the Son of God, you need to keep her. Right? Part of what he was accepting was the rest of his life, that social stigma that both he had to bear and Mary had to bear, right? The family had to bear, that, people knew something was fishy. Right? And just like they're looking at Jesus now and going, right? They weren't believing this whole, oh yeah, she got pregnant all by herself story. Right? And that's sort of what they're implying there with that. Isn't this the son of Mary? But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country, among his own relatives, and in his own house. Right? This is how I respond to a lot of the things Tricia says to me. That's all. So Jesus says, prophets are honored everywhere they go except their hometown and their own people. Right? Why? Because they know him too well. Right? They know him too well. I happen to know, for example, that Metropolitan Anthony Bashir, who was the Metropolitan of North America before Metropolitan Philip, lived with his sister. He was never married, so he lived with his sister most of his life. And his sister called him Antoon until the day he died. No Metropolitan, no saying no. Right.
What's that name?
It's his name. It's his first name. He's called him Tony, basically.
Tony.
Yeah. Why? Well, because it's his sister. Right? She's not going to call you any, My sisters don't call me Father Stephen. We'll put it that way, too. If they're being nice, they call me by my first name. But they call me other things, too. But, right? So that's what Jesus is saying, right? Jesus is saying, I guess this is what I should have expected, right, in my hometown. Right. Now he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. Then he went about the villages in a circuit teaching. So, why can't he do a lot of miracles there? They don't believe, right? Nobody there has any faith, except for a few people. There are a few people, right, who have faith and he heals them, right? But for the most part,
throwing rocks and now lift up the dead.
yeah.
He's running around here crazier than a chicken. I know him.
Yeah. So now he starts working his way out to the other villages, right? Traveling out to the other villages where people will accept him and listen to what he has to say. Verse 7, and he called the 12 to himself and began to send them out 2 by 2. Okay, so he's sending them out again, right? Where? Into these villages. There's all these little villages. And when we say villages, we should make this clear too, including Nazareth. Okay? We think because there's a city called Nazareth there now in Palestine, that Nazareth, where Jesus was from, was a city. It was not a city. Okay, it was a village. And the difference between a city and a village at this point in history is a city like Bethsaida, right? You could go there today and we have the archaeological remains, right? Because there were stone floors in the houses, right, and stone walls, right? So, for example, Peter's mother-in-law's house, you could go see it. Right? When it's mentioned there, we found it, right? All the city's still there. These villages, a lot of times, did not have any permanent buildings. They did not have stone buildings. They had basically huts. Right? And these villages were either fishing villages, fishing on the Sea of Galilee, that were there sort of seasonally, or they were farming villages that were sort of built by the farm workers. Right? When they went out to work the harvest, right, and then out of season, everybody would go back into the city. So there are no remains of Nazareth where Jesus grew up. We think the city of Nazareth today is roughly near where it was, but it's not the same town. So these villages he's sending them to. When it says Jesus is going to the villages, he's going to these little collections of huts, right, and houses. And these are peasants, right? These are workers, these are common people. These aren't homeowners, right? These aren't homeowners. They aren't, they don't have a little house and a little patch of grass and right? we think of, right? These are people who are dirt poor, living in temporary dwellings, right? And working as long as the sun's out. Okay? This shows you again the kind of poverty Jesus grew up in, right? Because if his dad was a techno and was a handyman, who was he working for?
The rich people.
No. No. The villagers, right, were farmers who were working for the landowner. He would have been working for the villagers, right? He's helping maintain these temporary dwellings and stuff in the village. Okay? So he's even a rung down, right? He's even a rung down from that. He's trying to get paid from the excess that the peasants have, right? Okay? So, yeah, not good, right? We're talking kind of crushing kind of poverty here. But so as Jesus is going to these villages, right, now he sends the disciples out to sort of go across the countryside and find these people in these little villages to preach to them. And he sends them out two at a time. He commanded them to take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bag, no bread, no copper in their money belts, but to wear sandals, and not to put on 2 tunics. Okay. So they don't get to bring a change of clothes. Okay. They don't get to bring any money. They don't get to bring any food. Right? Because you can have a walking stick. Have a walking stick, start walking. Right? Sends them in different directions to these villages. Also, he said to them, in whatever place you enter a house, stay there till you depart from that place. And whoever will not receive you nor hear you, when you depart from there, shake off the dust under your feet as a testimony against them. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Okay? So there's 2 commands there. First, wherever they ask you to stay there the whole time you're in the village. What does that mean? That means whoever you meet first and who invites you to their house, you go and stay with them. If 3 days later somebody likes your preaching and has a little nicer house and a little more money, a little better food, tough luck, you're staying where you started, right? You're not trying to work your way up, right? Well, what's he saying to the disciples? Here's what are you in this for? Right? If you're in this to try to work your way up, right? Try and get more money and patronage, right? Work your way up in the world, you come to the wrong place. Right? You took the wrong job. Go back to fishing. Right? Because this isn't going to get you there. Right? It's interesting we used to joke around back when I was a Protestant pastor about, whenever a pastor left one church to go to another church, they'd always say they felt like the Holy Spirit was leading them, to go from the old church to the new church. And somehow the Holy Spirit always seemed to lead pastors from smaller churches to bigger churches. And from churches with smaller salaries to churches with bigger salaries. It was interesting how that worked, right? It never worked the other way, right? The Holy Spirit never told anybody to go to the little church that couldn't pay you. Right? They always told you to keep working your way up, right? So this is Jesus saying the opposite, right? This is Jesus saying the opposite. Whoever shows you hospitality, you accept their hospitality. Right? You're not too good for it. Right? And you're not to be looking for better offers. Or trying to finagle something out of somebody. The second command is, if you go to the village and nobody will show you hospitality, right? They all tell you to buzz off, right? Then don't argue with them, right? Don't fight them. Kick the dust off your feet, right? Move on to the next village. But then what does he say? He says it will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Now, I don't remember how many of you folks were even here. It's now 5 years ago, by the way. 5 years ago when we started the book of Genesis. So I don't know if you were here or remember when we talked about Sodom and Gomorrah. But one of the things we talked about at that time is that people today have a very wrong impression of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and what it's about. Chiefly in that a lot of people seem to think the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is about homosexuality, which it isn't. Okay? There are plenty of passages in the Old Testament that condemn homosexuality. So if you're looking for those, I can show those to you. There's a lot of them in Leviticus. But the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not about that. Okay? The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is about hospitality. Because if you look at where it is in the story, it comes right after the hospitality of Abraham. Right? Abraham and Sarah are camped under the oak at Mamre, right? And God himself shows up with two angels. Remember? And when Abraham sees them coming, he goes and he kills the fatted calf, he lays out the big spread, he welcomes them, right? Shows them all this hospitality, talks with them, converses with them, right? And then at the end of that story, God sends the two angels to go over to Sodom and Gomorrah. Why does he send them to Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, because he's already had this whole haggling with Abraham, right? Because Abraham knows his nephew Lot is now living in Sodom. Okay? And God tells Abraham, I'm about to wipe Sodom off the face of the earth because they're evil. Right? And I'm done with them. Right? He says, the cup of their iniquity is full. They've been evil a long time. It's not new. Right? And God's been being patient, being patient, being patient. Now it's at the end. He can't let their evil continue because they're victimizing other people. Right? And so God says, I'm done with them. I'm going to destroy Sodom. And Abraham says, well, surely, right, you won't destroy the righteous people with the wicked people. Right? God says, well, no, of course I won't do that. He says, okay, well, if I can find 50 righteous people in Sodom, will you spare the whole city? And God says, sure, because he knows there aren't 50 righteous people in Sodom. Right? So he says, sure. Everyone says, okay, 50 may be a lot, okay? So he says, what if I can find like 25? Right? If I can find 25 righteous people, would you spare the whole city? God says, yes, you find me 25 righteous people in Sodom, which there aren't. I will spare the city. Right? So Abraham backs up again. He says, okay, 25 may be a little ambitious too, okay? 10. Let's say I can find 10 people. Right? God says, for 10 people I would spare the city. Well, unfortunately, there aren't 10 people. Okay? There's 4. Right? One of them isn't even. But there's 4 relatively righteous people living in Sodom, Lot and his family. Right? And so, even though he couldn't find 10, God still sends the angels. Why? He sends the angels to get Lot and his family. He says, go get Lot and his family and get them out of the city before the city's destroyed. So they won't be punished with the other people. Now, when the two angels go there, right, we get the exact opposite of the hospitality that Abraham showed them, right? Abraham lays out the big meal and welcomes them, and right, mi casa es su casa, right? Right, everything's great. They go to Sodom. Lot welcomes them, right?
Yeah.
Lot welcomes them and says, "Come into our house," right? But what do the men of the city say? Right? They come and basically say, "Yeah, we want to rape and murder them." Right? Why? Because that's what they do in Sodom. Right? We've talked about before, the reason there's so much in the Old Testament about how you treat aliens and strangers and travelers is that there was no, CSI Palestine. Right? Nobody had your fingerprints on file. Right? There was no forensics. Okay? So if you went and traveled to another country and you never came back, you just never came back. Right? There wasn't going to be an investigation. No one was going to come and try and find you. Right? And so people of evil intent knew, right? Hey, this guy's from 100 miles from here. Nobody knows exactly where he is. Nobody knows what's going on. I can do whatever I want. I can kill him. I can rob him. Right? I can rape him. Whatever. No one will ever find out. There's not going to be any consequences. Right? So the picture of the evil of Sodom isn't focused on the homosexuality. It's the fact that they look at the weaker person. Right? It's the men of Sodom too, not the women. Right? They look at weaker people, orphans, widows, travelers, strangers, not as people to be welcomed and people to be cared for and people to be protected, right? But as people to be abused, to be used for your own ends, right? That's the lack of hospitality, right? That's the evil in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And that's why it seems so bizarre to us in our culture, but that's why Lot says, well, why don't you rape my 2 daughters instead? And we don't go like, what? Right? Like, why on earth would you? Right? But that's the level of hospitality. Right? He'd rather have this horrible thing happen to a member of his own family than to a stranger. Right? That's what it's showing us. It's showing us the level of his, right? These people are strangers, these people are travelers, these people are helpless. Right? I'd rather have it happen to me. I'd rather have it happen to my own family than something to happen to them. So it's that's the contrast that's going on in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's why Jesus brings it up here. Right? Because Jesus knows some of these villages they walk into, like Nazareth that he just walked into, right, aren't going to welcome them, aren't going to be happy to see them. Right? Aren't going to be happy to see them. And those towns are then going to face the same kind of judgment that Sodom and Gomorrah did. Right? Where they're going to have to answer for how they treated the stranger, right, who came into their village. Okay? And this emphasis on hospitality isn't just in the Bible. Isn't just in the Bible. This is all through ancient culture. There's a story in the book of Acts where, at least in Lystra, where Saints Paul and Barnabas come to the town. And it says, we're told, it's kind of cryptic in the book of Acts if you don't know the background. Right? It says they thought that they were Zeus and Hermes, right? The Greek gods. Right? Paul and Barnabas, and you're like, why would they think Paul and Barnabas were Greek gods? And they all run out and they're trying to sacrifice to them. Right? Trying to offer sacrifices to them. You're like, that's weird. Why would you? Well, if you read Ovid's Metamorphoses, right? Ovid was a Latin poet. There was this story in that region around Lystra, which is in what's now Turkey. There was this story that way back about Zeus and Hermes came and visited these villages right there. And they came to the one village, wanted a place to stay, everybody told them to buzz off. They came to the next village, wanted a place to stay, everybody told them to buzz off. They came to the third village, and told them. Fourth village, there's one elderly couple. Said, oh, you can come and stay with us. Right? And cooked them some stew, they didn't have anything. And so the next day, Zeus and Hermes revealed to them, hey, we're Zeus and Hermes. Right? And they went and slaughtered everyone else in the other villages. who would not let them stay with them. And then did some magic on the elderly couple, so the elderly couple turned into a tree. I know it's weird. Greek mythology. But turned into a tree so they could live together forever. Okay? And this tree was, at the time that Saints Paul and Barnabas came to Lystra, was outside of the town. Right? The tree that they believed was this elderly couple. Okay? So when Paul and Barnabas come to town, and Paul does a couple miracles healing people, they go, it's Zeus and Hermes, they're back. We better invite them in or they're going to nuke the town. Right? Because they have this story. Right? They have this story in their head. Everybody go get some food. Get sacrifice, right? And Paul and Barnabas are like, no, we're just human beings. Right? No. But that story, you can see there's a similar kind of emphasis there on hospitality to strangers. Right? On how you treat strangers. So that's what Jesus is appealing to here. Right? Is this value of how you treat the stranger who's helpless by virtue of being a stranger. Verse 12, so they went out and preached that people should repent. And they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. Now note the fact that they anointed people with oil. Right? They anointed people with oil and healed them. That was part of the healing that the disciples were doing. Okay? This is where we get the anointing of the sick in the Orthodox Church. In St. James' epistle, he refers back to this, right, to this practice, where he says, if one of you is sick, you should call the presbyters, right, together. They will anoint him with oil. They will pray for him. He will be healed. His sins will be forgiven. Right? But that isn't something that James just started, right, when he became the bishop of Jerusalem. That's not just some practice that he had, right? You can see right here in Mark, that goes back to Jesus, right? That goes back to Jesus sending the apostles out to heal, right? And when they're doing the healings, they're anointing people with oil and praying for their healing. Okay. So that sacrament of the Orthodox Church goes back to Jesus, which is the requirement, by the way, that Protestant theologians have for what is a sacrament, even though they only accept baptism and the Eucharist as being sacraments. They say those are the only ones that go back to Jesus. Well, here's the anointing of the sick coming from Jesus.
So did Jesus bless the oil like the bishop?
Well, no, that oil is the oil for chrismation. We'll get to that when we talk more about the Holy Spirit later on. But the oil for anointing the sick, that's what we do on Wednesday in Holy Week. Yeah.
Well, so just the apostles say prayer, that's it.
Right. Okay. So verse 14, now King Herod heard of him. See, this is where the problems start. King Herod heard of him, for his name had become well known. Okay. Where's King Herod? Remember, it had been divided into a tetrarchy, right? So he's down here in Jerusalem, right? He's not in control of Galilee anymore. His area's down here. So word has gotten down here about Jesus now even further. So this whole secret thing, not working so well, right? So King Herod hears about Jesus and what he's doing. And he said, John the Baptist is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him. Now, this is a really fascinating part of Mark because of how he tells the story out of order. When we last saw John the Baptist, remember he was still baptizing people down by the Jordan River. Now Herod says, oh, he's John the Baptist risen from the dead. And we go, oh wait, John the Baptist died? And now Mark is going to tell us this. Oh, by the way, yeah, John the Baptist died. It's going to tell us how that happened. So it's kind of a weird way to structure it. But we're going to get a flashback. But so he says, John the Baptist has risen from the dead and is going out and doing these things. Others said it is Elijah. And others said it is the prophet or like one of the prophets. Okay. Why would they think it was Elijah? Remember, Elijah never died. Right? He went up into heaven in the fiery chariot. Right? And so when you read a lot of Jewish literature outside the Bible, now Malachi talks a little bit about Elijah returning, but especially outside the Bible, there's all this stuff about Elijah coming back, sort of in the end days, right? In the last times, Elijah's going to come back. Now remember, Elijah did all kinds of miracles, including raising people from the dead, right? So there are these, and to this day, if you go to an Orthodox Jewish Passover, right, it's traditional that they leave an empty seat at the table. And if you ask them why there is an empty seat at the table, they will say that that seat is for Elijah. When he comes back. So they leave a seat for Elijah at the table. So this is still part of Jewish belief that Elijah is going to come back. Okay? So Herod, as we're going to find out, feels guilty about John the Baptist being dead. So he's like, oh great, he's back. Right? That's his concern. Right? Other people see what Jesus is doing. Oh, this must be Elijah come back. Right? This must be Elijah come back. And then other people say it is the prophet, meaning what? The Messiah. Right? So some people say, oh, he must be the Messiah. And other people say, or like one of the prophets. So they say, oh, well, he must be a prophet. So that's the non-committal people. I'm not willing to go all the way and say he's the Messiah, but he's probably a prophet. I'll go that far. Verse 16, but when Herod heard, he said, this is John whom I beheaded. He has been raised from the dead. For Herod himself had sent and laid hold of John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. Because John said to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So again, we're getting the story backwards. So Herod says, oh, he must be John the Baptist back who I beheaded. Oh, by the way, he beheaded him because John told him, what? It's not lawful for you to be married to your brother's wife. Right? Shouldn't really have to be told that. Right? I would think that, yeah, you should marry your brother's wife. Remember, his brother is one of Herod the Great's other sons. Right? Herod the Great dies. The Romans split Herod the Great's territory into 4 pieces. Right? Calls each of them a tetrarch, a ruler of a fourth. Right? So him marrying his brother's wife is essentially a political play, right, to put down his brother. So all 4 of these guys are all jockeying, to sort of try and take over the others. For politically, it's not this, oh wow, I'm in love with my brother's wife, some kind of forbidden love, romance story. This is a political move, right, to try to put down. Because obviously if he marries his brother's wife, that means his brother's heir becomes what? His heir, right? Which means that son is going to reign over both pieces, right? So this is a political move, right? This is a political move. And St. John the Foreigner, not being one to mince words, right? Says, pretty obviously this is against the law of Moses, right? For you to marry your brother's wife. I don't care what your political yada yada is. You can't marry your brother's wife, right? This is unlawful. Well, King Herod being the king, right, and having the authority to behead people, at least in his tetrarchy, as John sees his head cut off. Yeah. Now we're going to keep getting the story backwards, by the way. Therefore Herodias held it against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and holy man, and he protected him. And when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. Okay? So Herod, right, this word gets out, right, that he's going around talking about Herod being married to his brother's wife. Herodias, the wife, right, gets kind of upset. Right? Why are you letting this guy go around and say these things about me? Right? And insists Herod have him arrested. Herod arrests him, but then after he arrests him, he's scared to do anything to him. Right? Not because he has some kind of faith, right? It doesn't say he repented and followed John. It doesn't say he went out and was baptized, right? But he could tell that John was a holy person. Right? You could tell from his preaching, his teaching, and what he did that this is a holy person. And he's going, if I do something to him, he's going to come back and bite me. Right? This is going to, God's judgment's going to follow me. He's superstitious, essentially. Right? Superstitious, essentially. He may have been thinking back to, for example, Ahab and Jezebel. Right? Remember? All the, Ahab sort of was led around by his by his wife, killed all these prophets of God, did all these evil things, right? And then when God's judgment came, God wiped out his whole family, right? So Herod may be thinking back to that, right? Going, I don't know if I want to mess with prophets, right? Let's just leave the prophets alone. Okay. So he's got him in prison, but he's sort of taking care of him in prison, right? Even though he's got him locked up. He's trying to balance between not wanting to do that and having to listen to his wife, right? So he's stuck in the middle. Okay. Verse 21, then an opportune day came when Herod on his birthday gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers, and the chief men of Galilee. Okay. So he invites all of his people, and he invites the folks from up here, right? What's up here, in addition to everything else, that's his brother's territory, right? So he invites all the big wigs from his brother's territory too to come down and throw this big feast for his own birthday, throw himself a big birthday party. Okay? All the important people are there. And when Herodias' daughter herself came in and danced and pleased Herod and those who sat with him. Let's put a pause there. This is his wife's daughter. Came out and danced for him. Now this was not, she came out and did the soft shoe. Okay. And he was pleased. Like he said, oh, that was beautiful. Oh, that was nice. Okay. The original verbiage, okay, this is more exotic dance, right? Shall we say. She came out and performed an exotic dance, and he was not so much pleased as aroused. Yeah.
There's a movie, The Dance of the Seventh Day.
Yeah. Well, no, this is worse. This is more X-rated than R-rated. And this is his own stepdaughter, niece and stepdaughter. Yeah, unfortunately, because he's married his brother's wife. Yes, who he's now lusting after. Okay, so this shows you, right, the level that the.
His brother's still alive?
Yeah. Oh yeah, he invited all his brother's officials to this party. So part of this is humiliating his brother, right?
His brother's still alive.
Oh yeah.
And he's...
Yeah. It's sinking in. Yeah, this is deeply dysfunctional, we would call this, right? But this shows you, right? This is the person who's passing himself off as the king of the Jews. This is why the Pharisees want nothing to do with the Herodians. Right? The Herodians are the followers of Herod. Right? The Pharisees are like, right? Because the Pharisees are all about the law, right? And this ain't it. Right? This ain't it. So they think he's totally illegitimate. He's not a real king. Right? So we need to remember this when we see it say, so the Herodians and the Pharisees got together to plot how to kill Jesus. Right? For the two of them to work together, there was a lot of mutual hate, right, directed at Jesus involved. But so this is how Herod's household runs, right? And notice the nobles, the wealthy people from Judea and Galilee, they don't think anything of this, right? We don't read they were appalled, right? They were horrified that he was going after his own niece and stepdaughter, right? They're not disgusted, right? They're all clapping too, as far as we can, right? As far as we can tell, this is just great with them, right? So the ruling classes, as we can see, when I talked about how we have this idea of the separation of church and state, and they didn't have that in the ancient world, and so when Jesus is talking about the powers, he's talking about like Herod, and he's also talking about the demonic. Right, at the same time, because there's not really a separation. This is why there's not really a separation. right? The power structures in Judea are deeply evil, right? It's not just that, they don't allow civil liberties or something, right? Or they have a different governmental policy. They are deeply, deeply corrupt and evil. Okay, the rulers. Okay, so she dances, he becomes aroused, and says to her, "Ask me whatever you want, and I will give it to you." He also swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I'll give you, up to half my kingdom."
What was she gonna have to do for that?
Exactly. Exactly. That's not just like, wow, that was a great dance, he's negotiating her price. Right here. Right? And offering her up to half of his territory. Right? That's how deeply sick this man is. Right? So she went out and said to her mother, "What shall I ask?" Now let's pause again for a minute. The mother apparently doesn't have a problem with this. Right? The mother doesn't say, "Put some clothes on," right? She does, right? The mother's not over. The mother's like, "Oh, this is an opportunity." Right? I can get my husband / brother-in-law to sleep with my daughter, and in return get something I want. Right? So she's not an innocent victim in this either, right? She's right in there in the mix, right, in this corruption. So she says, "What shall I ask?" And her mother tells her, she said, "The head of John the Baptist." We've got incest going, right? We're keeping the incest train rolling. Let's add murder. Right? Let's add murder. Immediately she came in with haste to the king, right? Now notice, she doesn't say, "Mother, that's terrible. Why would we want to murder a prophet of God? Right? Shouldn't I get half his kingdom or something?" No, she runs in with haste. She's like, "Oh, good idea." Runs over to tell the king. And asks, saying, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Not even I want you to execute him. I want you to kill him right now and bring me his head, so I can see it on a plate."
She wasn't the one giving things.
Exactly. That's right. You do that, and implied, now then once she gets that, she's going to sleep with her stepfather. And the king was exceedingly sorry. Now he was fine with the incest and but he's got this at least superstitious thing with me murdering this prophet. This is going to go bad for me in the future, right? So now he's like, "Oh," right? So does he stand up to his wife? Does he say, "No, this is the line I won't cross. I'm pretty corrupt. I'm pretty lustful, but the murder is the line I won't cross," right? Right? No. Yet, because of the oaths, and because of those who sat with him, he did not want to refuse her. Oh, he promised in front of all these people. What'll they think of me if I don't go murder this guy now? Right? So this shows you that all these party guests are all on board with this. Right? Oh yeah, cut off his head and then go sleep with her. Right? They're all on board. None of them are appalled. None of them are sickened. In fact, they're putting pressure on the king to do it. And he folds. So immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded his head to be brought. And he went and beheaded him in prison. Brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. So she goes, "Oh, look, Ma, I got you just what you wanted." Decapitated head. So, Mark gives us a window here. Right? This isn't just, oh yeah, Herod's a sinner. Well, we're all sinners. Right? We all have our failings. Right? He's showing us just how deeply corrupt, deeply evil, right, the rulers over God's people are. Right? the rulers over God's people are. And that there's this connection. The demons Jesus is casting out, right? And the lifestyle activities of these people, right? Remember, he had that conversation with the Pharisees. If you choose to make God your enemy, you're allying yourself with Satan, right? Well, Herod's right on board there with the devil, right? This is a demonic lifestyle, to say the least, right? In fact, the guy running around naked in the tombs was probably doing a little better than Herod at this point, right? In terms of morality. Okay? So that's what Mark is giving us a window into here. Right? He's giving us a window into just how, right? Just how sordid and twisted things have become.
But apparently he does have a guilty conscience because he's still scared after he was beheaded.
Well, I don't know if that's a guilty conscience. He is scared. He's superstitious enough to be scared. Right? So when he hears about Jesus, he's, oh man, he came back from the dead to get me. Right? Get me for cutting off his head. I think that's more at the level of superstition and cowardice than real repentance. Right? Because we don't hear, so he sent messengers to Jesus, right, to repent and apologize, and right? We don't read that.
Well, I didn't say that guilt.
Yeah.
He
Well,
has
yeah.
some sort of, he has at least has enough insight to feel guilty.
Well,
A sense that he's done something wrong and he's going to get punished.
he's scared. I'm willing to say he's scared. I don't know if it goes to guilt. I don't know if it goes to I did something wrong. I think it's more like I knew something like this would happen. He's coming back to get me. Kind of thing. Right? Because remember, in the Greco-Roman world, they believed in, for example, the Furies. Right? You read the Orestes kills his father. Right? The Furies sort of come out of hell and rip him to pieces. Right? So they were kind of superstitious that way. Right? So I think it may be operating with Herod more on the level of superstition. I knew I shouldn't have killed that holy man. Oh man, now they're coming to get me, kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
More than actually, I did something wrong and I should.
He believes in demons.
Yeah. Yeah, he's superstitious and scared. And a coward. Right? Verse 29, when his disciples heard of it, they came and took away his corpse and laid it in a tomb.
Did they get his head too?
Later. Yes, but to this day, St. John the Forerunner's head and his body are in two different places.
Really? They never put it together?
No. His body is in Syria. It's in a church in Syria. It was a church. They turned it into a mosque after the Muslims took it
Well,
over.
that what the Muslims-
Remember there was a big controversy where all these people were going crazy that Pope John Paul II prayed in a mosque? Remember that?
Yeah.
The mosque he prayed in, he went and prayed at the relics of St. John the Baptist, which is in a church that they converted into a mosque. He wasn't going to pray in a mosque, right? He was going there
So they kept
because
John the Baptist, the Muslims did?
they believe he's a prophet. They believe that he and Jesus are both prophets.
Because they gave him the body.
Yeah. So his body's there. The head was in Constantinople. Was brought from Jerusalem to Constantinople after Constantine converted, and was there until the Crusades. And the Fourth Crusades, the French stole it. Yeah. And they built Notre Dame de Paris, right? Notre Dame of Paris, the big church, the one you see all the time. They built that to house his head after they stole it. So his head is still there. If you go to Notre Dame de Paris, they have
Well, with the Muslims,
St. John the Forerunner's
they
head.
get back, so it'd be intact.
Well, the Muslims aren't going to give up anything. Where if we're lucky, ISIS won't blow it up. They blew up the tombs of several other prophets.
See the hand?
But, yeah.
It's bronze now, and they're silver.
Well, yeah, they've got because a lot of the bone has fallen apart, so they've kind of reconstructed it. They've got it held together with gold.
And it's in Notre Dame?
Yeah, in Paris.
What church? It's where,
That Notre Dame, Our Lady of Paris.
the Catholic church?
Yeah. Yeah. So, but they built that church specifically to house his head after they took it. It's from Constantinople.
Speaking of his tomb, the same thing where a certain day of the year or something where stuff comes up out of the ground on his body.
Yeah. Yeah, myrrh.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's bad.
It's hard because, like I said, it's the Muslims have it now. So they'll only let, they let Pope John Paul II in. But I'm pretty sure he was the first pope that ever got let in to see it.
What did the Muslims?
His body. St. John the Foreigner's body. The church it was in has been converted into a mosque. Yeah.
His head's in Paris.
But his head's in Paris, yes. Yeah.
Right.
So, this is probably a good place to stop for tonight. So,
The disciples have the mind.
well, the body would have, someone who was executed, right? They didn't bury. They literally, they just sort of throw them in a mass grave or in a garbage pile. So, Herodias took the head, right? But the body they would have just dumped. So the disciples essentially come to wherever they dumped it and go and retrieve it and give them a proper burial. Okay. So thanks everybody.